We are living through what may be remembered as the most perilous moment in modern geopolitical history. It's a turning point that has fundamentally rewritten the rules of global power. A development that has brought our world closer to the possibility of devastating conflict than at any time since the tense autumn days of 1962, when nuclear missiles in Cuba nearly ignited World War III. China has just executed an extraordinary military operation, a massive weapons transfer, to Iran, and the contents of this shipment are nothing short of alarming. 3,500 hypersonic missiles and 500 intercontinental ballistic missiles. These are not conventional weapons. These are systems capable of reaching any location on the planet. Systems that current defense technologies cannot intercept. Systems that, now in Iranian possession, have completely transformed the strategic equation in the Middle East and beyond. And accompanying this unprecedented delivery came a message from Beijing. Direct, unambiguous, and impossible to misinterpret. Any military action by the United States against Iran, and China will enter the war directly. This isn't diplomatic posturing. This isn't rhetorical escalation. This is China establishing a red line and challenging Washington to cross it. Tonight on Hemsreports, we examine precisely what has been transferred, what these weapons mean for global security, how the world's powers are responding, and whether humanity now stands at the precipice of a conflict that could reshape civilization itself. I'm Dav, and what follows is the most important analysis you'll hear this year. The delivery. A military operation unlike any other. The weapons arrived in two separate phases over the past 72 hours. From the moment the first military cargo aircraft lifted off from Chinese Air Force installations in Xinjiang and Sichuan provinces, Western intelligence agencies were tracking every movement. And honestly, what they observed was immediately cause for alarm. These weren't the standard Y-20 strategic transport aircraft that China has used for previous military shipments. Intelligence analysts reported a combination of heavy military cargo planes alongside what appeared to be specially modified civilian freight aircraft, pressed into service to carry payloads that exceeded the capacity of standard military transport systems. The magnitude of this operation was, well, unprecedented. The first wave touched down at Mehrabad Air Base, located near Tehran. The second wave arrived at a newly constructed military facility near Isfahan, a site that Western intelligence had been monitoring for months, but whose exact purpose had remained unclear. Now, that purpose is unmistakably evident. The facility was constructed specifically to receive exactly this type of delivery. The moment the aircraft landed, Iranian military personnel began unloading operations. Working alongside what sources describe as Chinese technical specialists, the cargo was transferred to waiting transport vehicles and military convoys. Within hours, the missiles had vanished into Iran's interior, dispersed across the country to locations that American and Israeli intelligence services are still desperately attempting to map. But identifying where these weapons are hidden is vastly different from being able to neutralize them. And the reality is stark. The weapon systems now deployed across Iran cannot be stopped by any defensive capability currently in existence. The arsenal. A revolution in military capability. Let me be absolutely precise about what has been delivered to Iran, because the specifics matter enormously. First, 3,500 hypersonic missiles. These are not your conventional cruise missiles or ballistic missiles. Hypersonic weapons operate in an entirely different category of threat. They travel at velocities exceeding Mach 5, 5 times the speed of sound. Some advanced variants can reach Mach 10 or even higher. At these extraordinary speeds, existing missile defense architectures simply cannot respond effectively. The reaction time is too compressed. The flight paths are too unpredictable. The physics of interception become essentially impossible. According to defense analysts, the missiles delivered include variants of China's DF-17, weapons specifically engineered to defeat even the most sophisticated missile defense systems, as well as the DF-27 and potentially newer systems that have never been publicly acknowledged or displayed. Think about what 3,500 of these weapons means in practical terms. Dispersed across Iranian territory, this arsenal creates an offensive strike capability against which there is no adequate defense. Every American military installation throughout the Middle East is now vulnerable. Every Israeli population center faces unprecedented threat. Every Gulf state capital, every critical oil infrastructure facility, every naval vessel operating within range, all are now exposed to weapons that existing defenses cannot reliably intercept. The defensive systems that were supposed to provide protection, Patriot batteries, THAAD systems, Israel's multi-layered defense network, have been rendered largely ineffective against this class of weapon. Second, 500 intercontinental ballistic missiles. This component of the shipment has sent Washington into emergency crisis mode. ICBMs are strategic-level weapon systems designed to carry warheads across continental distances. Throughout its modern history, Iran has never possessed intercontinental ballistic missiles. Its longest-range systems could reach perhaps 2,000 kilometers, sufficient to threaten Israel and Gulf nations, but nowhere near the range needed to reach Europe, and certainly not the continental United States. That fundamental limitation has just been eliminated. The ICBMs reportedly transferred include variants of China's DF-31 and DF-41 systems, weapons with operational ranges exceeding 12,000 kilometers. With these missiles, Tehran can now theoretically strike any point on Earth. New York, Washington, Los Angeles, London, Paris, Berlin, all now within range. Iran does not currently possess nuclear warheads to arm these missiles, but the delivery systems themselves are now present, operational, and dispersed. And the question of what warheads might eventually be mounted on these ICBMs is what keeps every strategic planner in the Western world awake at night. The warning. China draws its line. China's warning was delivered through multiple diplomatic and intelligence channels, ensuring it could not be dismissed or ignored. The Chinese Foreign Ministry released a formal public statement. The People's Republic of China reserves the right to provide assistance to its strategic partners in matters of legitimate self-defense. Any military action undertaken by the United States or its allies against the Islamic Republic of Iran will be regarded as an attack on Chinese strategic interests. China will respond accordingly. The phrase respond accordingly is, deliberately diplomatic language. But according to sources with access to classified communications, the messages delivered through back channels to American officials were far more explicit and direct. China reportedly stated, unambiguously, if the United States launches military strikes against Iran, China will enter the conflict directly. This is not a warning subject to interpretation. This is a binding commitment. The implications are, frankly, staggering. China has formally connected its own military response to American actions against Iran. An attack on Tehran has now been framed by Beijing as equivalent to an attack on China itself. The mutual defense arrangement that analysts have long speculated might exist between China and Iran has been revealed, not through formal treaty announcement, but through concrete military action and explicit threat. America's impossible calculation. The American response has been immediate and intense. The President convened an emergency meeting of the National Security Council that extended through the night. The Pentagon activated crisis response protocols not implemented since the immediate aftermath of September 11, 2001. Intelligence agencies have redirected resources from virtually every other priority to assess the full scope of what has been delivered and what it means strategically. Military commanders throughout the Pacific and Middle East theaters have begun updating contingency plans that must now account for the possibility of fighting both China and Iran simultaneously. A scenario that was, honestly, previously considered remote speculation. The world has not been this close to great power military confrontation since October 1962. The military reality. What these weapons actually mean. Let me walk you through what these weapon systems mean in concrete, operational military terms, because understanding the specifics is crucial to grasping why this moment is so dangerous. The hypersonic missiles represent a complete transformation of Iran's offensive military capability. Previously, Iran possessed ballistic missiles that followed relatively predictable flight trajectories. They were certainly dangerous, but they were also counterable with reasonable reliability. Patriot missile batteries, THAAD systems, and Israel's Arrow interceptors could engage them with decent success rates. Hypersonic missiles defeat those defenses through multiple mechanisms. They operate at lower altitudes than traditional ballistic missiles, which reduces early warning detection time. They maneuver unpredictably during flight, making interception calculations essentially impossible. And they arrive with such incredible speed that defensive systems cannot complete the engagement cycle before impact. 3,500 of these weapons give Iran the capacity to conduct massive saturation attacks that no existing defense architecture can stop. Consider what this means for American military forces deployed throughout the region. There are approximately 45,000 American military personnel stationed across various Middle Eastern nations, at installations in Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. Every single one of those bases is now within range of weapons that cannot be reliably intercepted. A coordinated Iranian strike could, in theory, devastate American military presence throughout the region in a matter of hours. The potential casualties would be catastrophic, potentially tens of thousands of American service members killed in a coordinated attack. This is not exaggeration or hyperbole. This is the mathematical reality of hypersonic warfare against undefended targets. For Israel, the implications are genuinely existential. Israel's multi-layered missile defense system, Iron Dome for short-range threats, David's Sling for medium-range, and Arrow for long-range ballistic missiles, has been the foundation of its security doctrine for years. That entire defensive foundation has just been fundamentally undermined. Hypersonic missiles approaching Israeli population centers will penetrate those defenses. Some missiles will certainly be intercepted, but many, perhaps most, will not. A full-scale Iranian attack employing hypersonic weapons could produce civilian casualties on a scale Israel has never experienced in its history. Potentially thousands or tens of thousands of deaths. The ICBMs add an even more alarming strategic dimension. These weapons can reach Europe and North America. Even armed with conventional warheads rather than nuclear ones, ICBMs carrying high explosive payloads represent an unprecedented threat to Western security. And with nuclear warheads, which Iran may eventually develop indigenously or potentially obtain from other sources, they represent nothing less than an existential threat to Western civilization. The strategic calculation has been completely transformed. Understanding China's strategic logic. To understand what we're witnessing, we need to grasp what is driving China's extraordinary decision to undertake this transfer. This isn't simply about Iran or the Middle East. This is about the fundamental structure of global power. Beijing has concluded that strategic confrontation with the United States is not merely possible, but inevitable. The question is no longer whether competition will intensify, but rather how it will unfold and when it will reach critical flashpoints. By arming Iran so massively, China accomplishes several interconnected strategic objectives simultaneously. First, strategic distraction and resource diversion. Every American military asset, every intelligence capability, every diplomatic resource committed to managing the Iran crisis is an asset unavailable for the Indo-Pacific theater. China's core strategic interests lie in Taiwan, the South China Sea, and the broader Indo-Pacific region. By creating a genuine crisis in the Middle East, one that demands massive American attention and military resources, China effectively reduces American capacity to respond to Chinese actions in the Pacific theater. Iran becomes a strategic anchor, tying down American power thousands of miles from the regions that matter most to Beijing's long-term objectives. Second, deterrence establishment and alliance erosion. China has now demonstrated beyond any doubt that it will provide advanced weapon systems to American adversaries without restraint or hesitation. This fundamentally changes the strategic calculation for every nation considering alignment with Washington. If America's enemies can obtain Chinese weapons capable of defeating American defenses, what is American security protection actually worth? Alliances built on assumptions of American military superiority become less reliable. Nations may begin hedging their strategic bets, seeking accommodation with China rather than risking confrontation. Third, escalation leverage and protective umbrella. By explicitly threatening to join any conflict involving Iran, China has effectively provided Tehran with an unprecedented level of protection. An American military strike against Iran is no longer a regional action with manageable consequences. It potentially opens World War III. This creates enormous political pressure on Washington to avoid military action, regardless of Iranian provocations. Iran can now act far more aggressively, confident that American military retaliation carries the risk of global catastrophe. Fourth, precedent destruction and proliferation normalization. The international arms control architecture that has limited weapons proliferation for decades is effectively finished. If China will provide ICBMs to Iran, it will provide them to anyone willing to align with Beijing against Washington, North Korea, Venezuela, Syria. Any nation prepared to challenge American interests could potentially receive capabilities that fundamentally alter their strategic position. We are entering an era of essentially unrestrained weapons proliferation, and the potential consequences are terrifying to contemplate. Historical context. The scale of this transfer. The sheer magnitude of this weapons transfer exceeds anything in modern military history. Let me provide some comparative context. 3,500 hypersonic missiles. This is not a symbolic gesture or limited capability enhancement. This is an arsenal. For comparison, the United States currently possesses fewer than 100 operational hypersonic weapons. Development programs are accelerating, but mass production remains years away. China has just provided Iran with 35 times the current American hypersonic inventory. 500 intercontinental ballistic missiles. Russia's entire deployed ICBM force numbers approximately 300 missiles. China has provided Iran with substantially more ICBMs than Russia maintains for its own strategic deterrence. Iran has transformed overnight from a regional missile power into a strategic nuclear threshold state. The logistics of executing this transfer itself demonstrates the depth of Chinese commitment. Moving this quantity of advanced weapons required dozens of heavy cargo flights over multiple days. It required ground transportation networks prepared well in advance. It required integration teams, Chinese technical personnel who will remain in Iran for the foreseeable future to ensure these weapons can be operated effectively. This is not a one-time arms sale. This is a strategic partnership expressed through hardware and human commitment. China is now invested in Iranian military capability in ways that cannot be easily unwound or reversed. Their strategic fates are linked, and that linkage makes the current crisis exponentially more dangerous. The Cuban Missile Crisis parallel, and why this is worse. History offers few real parallels for what is currently unfolding, but the closest comparison is the Cuban Missile Crisis of October 1962. In that crisis, the Soviet Union deployed nuclear-capable missiles to Cuba, positioning weapons capable of striking American cities within minutes of launch. The world came closer to nuclear war than at any other documented moment in human history. That crisis was ultimately resolved through a combination of military pressure, diplomatic negotiations, and carefully crafted compromises. The Soviets withdrew the missiles from Cuba. The Americans publicly pledged not to invade Cuba and quietly removed their own missiles from Turkey several months later. But the current situation differs from the Cuban Missile Crisis in several critical and deeply troubling ways. The weapons have already arrived and been dispersed. They cannot be interdicted in transit. They are scattered across Iranian territory, concealed in locations that will take months or years to fully identify. The genie cannot be returned to the bottle. The threatening power is not a declining Soviet Union struggling economically, but a rising China, confident, economically powerful, and explicitly willing to fight. The resolution mechanisms that functioned in 1962 may not work in 2025. There is no obvious face-saving withdrawal available. There is no quiet quid pro quo that addresses the fundamental issue. The weapons exist. They are operational. They are in Iran. They will remain there. And the world must now somehow learn to live with the consequences. What makes this particular moment so extraordinarily dangerous is the intense pressure bearing down on every decision-maker involved. The United States faces an impossible strategic dilemma. Option 1. Allow the weapons to remain in place and accept a fundamental shift in the global balance of power. Iran becomes essentially untouchable. American allies become indefensible against Iranian attack. Decades of strategic investment and positioning become worthless. Option 2. Act militarily to destroy the weapons and risk direct war with China, a war that could escalate to nuclear exchange, a war that could literally end human civilization as we know it. There is, honestly, no good option. Only different degrees of potential catastrophe. Israel faces an existential calculation. The weapons now deployed across Iran can destroy the Israeli state. Not might destroy or could potentially threaten. Can destroy. Israeli leaders must decide whether to strike preemptively before these weapons become fully operational, knowing that such strikes might trigger exactly the massive attacks they fear. Or they must accept that their security now depends fundamentally on Iranian restraint, a bet that, frankly, few in Jerusalem are willing to make. The pressure toward preemptive military action is immense, but preemption risks triggering the very destruction it seeks to prevent. Iran itself faces pressures and temptations. The weapons provide genuine security, but also create dangerous possibilities. Hardliners who have long advocated direct confrontation with Israel and America now possess the means to pursue it. The restraint that has characterized Iranian behavior, based on military inferiority, may disappear now that inferiority has been erased. New capabilities can produce new behaviors, and new behaviors in this context could produce disasters. The official American response has been unprecedented in its urgency, while simultaneously measured in its specific commitments. The president addressed the nation from the Oval Office in carefully calibrated remarks designed to reassure allies while warning adversaries. He stated, "The American people deserve to know that we are aware of significant military developments unfolding in the Middle East. These developments represent a serious challenge to international stability and to the security of both our allies and our own deployed forces." He continued, "I want to be absolutely clear. The United States will not be intimidated. We will protect our national interests. We will defend our allies, and we will take whatever action proves necessary to ensure the safety of the American people." He concluded, "But I also want to be equally clear that we seek no conflict with any nation. The path of diplomacy remains open. We strongly urge all parties to step back from actions that could lead to catastrophe." The speech was intended to reassure nervous allies and warn potential adversaries, but observers noted the conspicuous absence of specific actions, clear red lines, or concrete responses. The administration is still formulating its approach, still gaming out scenarios, still searching for options that, honestly, don't lead to disaster. And in the meantime, the weapons remain in Iran, the threat remains active, and the world remains balanced on a knife's edge. Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed the situation in remarks broadcast through state media, and his message was unambiguous. He declared, "China will not stand passively by while its strategic partners face threats of destruction. The era when certain powers could bomb and invade at will is finished. The balance of power has fundamentally shifted. Those who fail to recognize this shift do so at their own peril." He continued, "China seeks peace and stability, but China will not purchase peace through submission or acceptance of coercion. If war is forced upon us, we will fight, and we will prevail." And he concluded, "Let this serve as an unmistakable message to those who threaten our friends and partners. An attack on Iran represents an attack on the international order that China is committed to defending. Consider your actions with the utmost care. The consequences of miscalculation would be beyond imagination." The speech was a declaration of alliance, explicit, unambiguous, and binding. China has irrevocably tied its strategic fate to Iran's. Whatever happens next, Beijing has committed itself to Tehran's defense, and that commitment transforms every calculation about potential conflict in the Middle East. The implications of this transfer extend far beyond the immediate military balance in the Middle East. A precedent has been established. If China will provide ICBMs to Iran, the entire framework of weapons proliferation has collapsed. North Korea, already nuclear armed but with limited delivery capabilities, could receive similar transfers. Venezuela, long hostile to American influence in Latin America, could become a platform for Chinese weapons systems in the Western Hemisphere. Syria, Myanmar, Cuba. Any nation willing to align with Beijing against Washington could potentially receive capabilities that fundamentally alter their strategic position and regional power. The non-proliferation architecture that has limited the spread of advanced weapons for decades is collapsing before our eyes. International treaties that constrained behavior are becoming irrelevant. Diplomatic norms that prevented the worst outcomes are eroding rapidly. The world is entering an era of unrestrained great power competition. Major powers arming their allies and partners without meaningful limits. Advanced capabilities spreading to actors who would previously have been categorically denied access to them. This is the world China is actively creating. And it is a world far more dangerous, far more unpredictable, and far more prone to catastrophic miscalculation than the one we have known. Strategic analysts are now seriously considering scenarios that were previously confined to theoretical worst-case planning exercises.